Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a myth that includes thunderbolts, jealous goddesses, an unfortunate priestess, and a truly bizarre bovine twist. You're standing at the very edge of time, when the universe was still figuring itself out, and the Greek gods hadn't quite settled into their personalities. In fact, they were still fighting for control. That means power struggles, betrayal, and plenty of dramatic sky staring. You're about to walk beside figures with names etched into marble, and whispered by old olive trees. The world smells like rain-soaked stone and burnt offerings. The air hums with divine energy. You're not quite mortal, not quite God, but you've got a front row seat to a time when myths were just Tuesday. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing the sleepy corners of the world you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the mists of ancient chaos, where the land doesn't yet have proper borders, and gods squabble like siblings over toy blocks. First came the Titans, massive elemental beings who ruled before the more famous Olympians ever got their laurel wreaths. You're watching Cronus. The king of the Titans nervously glance over his shoulder. Why? Because he keeps eating his children. You probably won't survive this. Not because you're in danger, or you're a spectral observer, but because honestly, you might drift off from the sheer repetitive weirdness of it all. Cronus swallowed his kids whole to avoid a prophecy that one of them would overthrow him. It's not a great parenting strategy, but it did lead to some seriously odd digestive history. Eventually, one clever mother Rhea tricks Cronus by giving him a rock instead of baby Zeus. That's right, Cronus eats a rock and doesn't notice. Ancient gods apparently weren't known for chewing carefully, so Zeus is hidden away raised by magical goats in a cave on Mount Ida. That goat, by the way, is named Amalthea, and she provides milk protection and one of the first recorded cases of accidental divine childcare. You sit beside baby Zeus as he burps lightning and punches shadows. Okay, not literally, but the myth says he grew strong and radiant, which might just be a fancy way of saying noisy toddler with powers. Eventually, grown-up Zeus confronts Cronus, slices open his belly myth style, so no need to flinch and freeze his swallowed siblings. Welcome to the first known episode of Greek Gods, the Reunion Show. These siblings, Poseidon, Hades, Hestia, Demeter, and Hera, join Zeus in a new generation of rule. They overthrow the Titans in a cosmic throwdown called the Titanomachy. Picture thunder crashing, mountains crumbling, and your pillow vibrating from imaginary earthquake noises. Now the Olympians are in charge. Finally, a divine government. Too bad they immediately start acting like high schoolers with too much power. Zeus, being the top god, gets sky and thunder. Poseidon takes the sea. Hades sulks underground. The others get temples, epithets, and a lifetime of family drama. One thing you'll learn very quickly is that Greek gods are messy. And by messy, we mean emotionally volatile, flirtatious, proud, and almost allergic to honest communication. So here we are. Zeus is now king of the gods, married to his sister Hera. Let's all blink slowly and move on, and known for his, shall we say, wandering attention. You're walking through a temple city past giant statues of the gods as prayers drift through the air like incense. At one altar, a young woman kneels Io. She's a priestess of Hera, devoted, focused, probably hoping to avoid divine entanglements. Spoiler alert, she does not succeed. But before we get there, you peer into Zeus's thundercloud throne room. It's both opulent and tacky somehow. Marble columns, golden lions, and a suspiciously large chaise lounge. Zeus lounges with a goblet of nectar, which, let's be honest, probably tastes like fermented peaches. He's bored. Being king of the universe is weirdly monotonous. And then he notices Io. Historians still argue whether this myth began as a political allegory or as a warning tale about divine boundaries. Some say it's a moon cycle myth. Others believe it reflects the fears of mortal women caught between powerful forces. But for you, it's just the beginning of a tale that will drift across continents, change shapes, and involve a lot of running. You'll see temples crumble, eyes turn into feathers, and one very stressed cow plod across ancient landscapes. But for now, Io is still human, and Zeus is about to make a choice that alters her life and clouds forever. Stay close. The lightning hasn't even cracked yet. You've made it past the divine job promotions and family squabbles. Now you're standing just outside the temple of Hera, watching the light flicker off polished stone. The air smells like lavender and burnt offerings. Inside, Io lights a bundle of herbs, the smoke curling upward in a tight spiral. She's calm, composed, and very much not interested in what's happening on Mount Olympus right now, but Zeus is watching. And not in a divine plan kind of way, more like the idle CEO bored during a conference call kind of way. You're floating above as he props his chin on one hand, eyes squinting through clouds. That mortal right there, the one minding her own business. She's interesting. You can almost hear the thunder rumble like a groan of frustration. He's been through this before, saw, liked, acted, and it rarely ends well. And yet he leans forward. Zeus descends from Olympus not in glory but in disguise. A soft breeze, a shimmer of golden fog. You being omnipresent for now can see through the illusion. Io doesn't. She just feels odd, like someone's in the room. She's not wrong. It's worth pausing here to appreciate how truly awkward this is. He's a god. She's a mortal. And she's literally working at the temple of his wife. Bold move, Thunder Daddy. What happens next? Well, that's where the myths start to blur. Some versions say Zeus simply approaches. Others suggest he tries to conceal the affair behind magical clouds, the divine version of drawing the curtains. But either way, Hera notices. And if there's one thing you should never do, it's give Hera a reason to squint suspiciously in your direction. Hera, queen of the gods, goddess of marriage and vengeance. You know, everyone's two favorite things. She smells scandal like a wolf smells meat, and right now her divine senses are tingling. You glide back to Olympus where Hera is knitting, or maybe inspecting a galaxy. It's unclear. But she suddenly stops and turns. Something is off, she mutters, and a dozen peacocks ruffle their feathers in agreement. Now let's talk about those peacocks. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient Greece, the peacock was sacred to Hera. Those eyes on their tail feathers, they're said to come from Argus, the all-seeing guardian. We'll get to him soon. Quirky tidbit. The ancient Greeks believed peacocks had flesh that didn't rot after death, kind of like the Tupperware of birds. Hera apparently was into aesthetic and longevity. Back to the drama. Zeus, realizing he's moments away from a divine whooping, panics. And in a move that only makes sense in mythology, or very bad improv, he turns Io into a cow. Yes, a literal cow. Not a metaphor, not a nickname. A full-blown, four-legged, tail-swatting, grass-munching cow. You blink. Io blinks well, tries to. Cows don't blink the same way, so now she's trying to understand what just happened while chewing cud in total confusion. Imagine that moment. You were a respected priestess of the goddess of marriage, and now you're swatting flies with your tail and mooing involuntarily. You're still conscious, still very much you, but now your hands are hooves. It's easy to laugh, but there's also something quietly terrifying here. Io never chose any of this. She prayed, served, and stayed loyal, and in return got turned into livestock because a thunder god got flirty and didn't want to get caught. Scholars still debate whether this is a cautionary tale for women, or an allegory for the loss of personal agency in the face of fate. Some interpret it as a cycle of purification, the cow as sacred, the wanderer as penitent. Others think it's just old Greek drama, doing what it does best, chaos, but make it myth. Either way, you're now trailing behind a wide-eyed heifer, stumbling through the temple courtyard, her hooves clacking on marble, her big, brown eyes blinking in frantic confusion. And right on cue, Hera arrives. You can almost hear the soap opera music. She descends gracefully regal and unbothered. Her peacocks lead the way, fanning their tails like elite bodyguards. Zeus. He's pretending to admire the architecture, whistling. Badly. What's this, Hera asks, eyeing the cow. Zeus, probably sweating divine bullets, shrugs. A gift. A sacred cow. For you. And like every suspicious wife in myth, Hera narrows her eyes and smiles just enough to freeze your blood. Lovely, she says. I'll take her. And before Zeus can stop her, Hera claps her hands, and Io, still confused, still mooing, is escorted away by divine servants and placed under a 24-hour watch. Enter Argus. We'll talk more about him in the next section, but for now you should know he's enormous, covered in eyes, and never truly sleeps. Hera assigns him to guard the cow. No escape, no privacy, no chewing clover without a report filed. You hover above, as Io is led into a meadow ringed by marble columns. Her cow ears flick. Her tail twitches. In the distance, she can still see the smoke of Hera's temple, the place she used to serve. The sky above is moody. Zeus watches from afar, unsure what to do. His heroic image, the king of gods, reduced to a frustrated husband who just lost control of the situation he created. And you're perched on a cloud watching this myth unfold like a slow-moving tragicomedy. This isn't the thunderstorm you expected. Not yet. It's the quiet dread before the storm. And poor Io, somewhere between divine pawn and mythic lesson, begins her long journey on 4 hooves across lands that may or may not remember her name. So now you're standing at the edge of a grassy field, early morning mist curling through the reeds. The sun's not up yet, but everything feels watchful. Still, the kind of quiet where even the birds seem hesitant to chirp. And right there, tethered by invisible divine leash, is a cow with the soul of a woman.
Yo.
She lies down slowly, legs folding beneath her breath, curling out in little clouds. You can see it in her eyes she hasn't slept. Can you sleep really when you're being stared at by a giant with 100 blinking eyes? Let's meet him. Argus Panoptes. His name literally means all-seeing. You can't miss him. He's tall, barrel-chested, and dotted head to toe with eyeballs. Some large, some small. Some blink slowly, some not at all. There are eyes on his arms, on his back, on the bottoms of his feet. He makes blinking sound like a thunderstorm. Argus is Hera's best watchdog. And he never truly sleeps. That's his whole thing. Half his eyes rest while the other half stay alert. It's not exactly fair for Io, but to Hera fair isn't the point control is. You float above as Argus watches. Doesn't move much. Doesn't speak. Occasionally chews on a fig or hums off key. But the eyes, always moving. Now here's your quirky tidbit of the day. Some versions of Argus's origins say he had eyes not because of any gift from the gods, but because he was once a giant peacock. Which sounds silly until you remember Hera's obsession with the bird. Ancient Greeks were weirdly committed to connecting divine security and fashion birds. Mainstream historical fact. Argus's story was probably designed to explain why peacocks have eyes on their tail feathers. This whole myth could have been ancient people squinting at a peacock's tail and saying, "Hey, that reminds me of a guy with way too many eyeballs." Anyway, back to Io. She grazes silently, a soft moo now and then. Occasionally a panicked look toward the sky, hoping maybe Zeus will show up and fix everything. He does not. Zeus is pacing Mount Olympus. He's muttering, holding thunderbolts like stress balls. But here's the thing about Zeus. He loves a dramatic rescue. It's kind of his brand. And if there's anything he hates more than being caught, it's not being the hero. So he starts plotting. And when the king of the gods needs something done with flair and sneakiness, there's really only one person to call Hermes. Ah, yes, Hermes, the god of travelers, thieves, athletes, messengers, and general shenaniganry. He's fast, clever, and suspiciously good at playing the flute. You're now perched on a branch above Argus and Io, as a stranger with a winged cap strolls into the field like he's out for a picnic. Hermes has a relaxed grin, a pan pipe slung casually at his belt, and an aura that says, "Hey, I'm harmless." He is not. "Nice cow," Hermes says casually to Argus. "Mind if I sit?" Argus nods. One eye blinks, then another, then 27 more. Hermes sits. He doesn't rush. He tells a few stories, ones with punchlines so dry even the olives on the trees wince. He pulls out the pipe, plays a few soft notes, then a few more. The melody floats like mist. It's simple at first, nothing flashy, but soon it threads itself into the grass, into the wind, and most importantly, into the eyelids of 100 eyeballs. You watch as Argus begins to sway. Not all of him, just a few limbs. Then a hand drops, a knee buckles, some eyes droop, others flutter. Hermes keeps playing. Historians still argue whether this moment represents divine cleverness or a disturbing level of manipulation. Some say it was the first lullaby in literature. Others call it an early assassination wrapped in music. Whatever it was, it works. One by one, the eyes close. And then, silence. Hermes stands, stretches, tosses the pipe into the air and catches it without looking. Then, in a move that's oddly gentle for a myth involving murder, he unsheathes a short blade and, well, let's just say Argus doesn't wake up. You'd think 100 eyes would offer better reflexes, but sleep is a powerful thing. Especially magical flute-induced sleep. Hermes turns to Io. She blinks. The cow version of blinking anyway. Her hooves shift in the grass. She's confused, hopeful, nervous. But before anything else happens, before freedom even sinks in, Hera arrives. She always arrives right when things are about to go well. You freeze as she descends from the clouds, her expression unreadable. Hermes shrugs. "Just doing my job," he says with a wink that probably doesn't help. Hera walks past him without a word and kneels beside Argus. Then, in one of those moments that Greek myths love for poetic closure, she lifts the eyes from his still body and places them gently onto the tail feathers of her favorite peacock. A tribute, a punishment, a fashion choice, maybe all three. And poor Io, she's still a cow. Yes, Argus is gone. But instead of freeing Io, Hera doubles down. She sends a gadfly, tiny, buzzing, relentless, to follow Io everywhere, stinging and nipping at her flanks day and night. Because sometimes in mythology, as in life, the punishment doesn't end when the jailer disappears. And now begins Io's long, itchy journey across the ancient world. But that is a tale for the next pasture. The sun hangs heavy and hot above the earth, and you're trotting beside a cow with sad eyes and a famous backstory. Her name is Io, once a priestess, now an unwilling participant in the world's strangest divine custody battle. She no longer wears robes. She wears flies. Specifically, one fly, a magical gadfly sent by Hera to make her life endlessly uncomfortable. It buzzes near her ears, lands on her haunches, then darts to her tail, biting and stinging with supernatural persistence. You'd swat it if you could, but this is Hera's fly, and even spectral onlookers like you don't mess with that. Io moose. It's a tired, mournful sound. You follow as she staggers away from Argus's now quiet meadow. The grass grows rougher, the trees sparser. Every few steps she jerks her head, trying to shake the buzzing. The sting makes her muscles twitch, her hooves slip. She barely knows where she's going, but anything is better than standing still. This is where the myth becomes a travel log. Io begins a long, mythically absurd journey across the ancient world. You'll pass through regions whose names now rest on stone tablets, or buried beneath centuries of sand. But Io walked them all with 4 legs and one eternal irritation. Your first stop, Boeotia, a fertile region in central Greece. Io stumbles through its olive groves, past temples, where her own name is starting to appear in whispered prayers. A farmer sees her and gasps. A talking cow. No, not quite. Just a cow with unmistakably human sadness. From there, she moves to Thessaly, then Epirus wandering along the ragged western coast. She doesn't eat much. The gadfly doesn't allow it. Every time she lowers her head to graze, the sting returns. It's cruel, yes, but it also creates the kind of myth that sticks in a listener's brain like a burr on a sock. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many versions of the tale, Io's journey was used to explain the origins of certain cities or natural features. Wherever she stopped, rested, or cried myths, say a river sprang up or a temple was founded. Her suffering literally shaped the map. And now she reaches the sea. The Ionian Sea, in fact, yes, named after her. She wades into the shallows, foam curling around her knees. The salt water stings the bites on her flanks. You watch her hesitate. She looks across the blue expanse, the sky too bright for her eyes, and then she plunges in. Cows, it turns out, are surprisingly good swimmers. Mythical cows. Even better. You drift above as she crosses waves, her breaths coming hard and fast. Dolphins trail behind her, curious. A few sea nymphs peer out from rock coves, whispering to one another. Some versions of the story say Poseidon sees her here, takes pity, and calms the waters. Others say he just watches and sighs. It's unclear. He's not a central character in this mess. You reach Illyria, modern-day Albania. Io stumbles ashore, dripping and shaking, then pushes forward again. Mountains rise ahead, jagged and snow-capped. The fly is still with her. At Dodona, she pauses. It's one of the oldest oracles in the Greek world. The sacred oak trees whisper in a language only priests can hear. And here, for the first time in her journey, Io feels seen. Not as a cow, not as a victim, but as something more. A rustle. A groan of branches. The oracle murmurs a prophecy no words you can make out. But Io lifts her head as if understanding. She turns southeast, toward Egypt. Historians still argue whether this myth represents a cultural link between ancient Greece and Egypt, or simply a borrowed story sewn together by scribes looking for deeper meaning. The Greeks had a complicated respect for Egyptian knowledge, and Io's path symbolically unites them. But she has to get there first. She moves through Macedonia past goat herders who throw her scraps of fig and call her blessed. Through Thrace, where wolves howl too close at night, and no one dares to approach a lone cow that flinches like a hunted thing. In Phrygia, she rests for a moment beneath a cypress tree. It's the first time in weeks she hasn't walked until collapse. The fly vanishes for a breath or two, just long enough for her to dream. And what does she dream of? Being human again. Feeling grass under her feet instead of hooves. Hearing her own voice instead of a low, haunted bellow. Eating olives with her hands. Seeing her reflection in a pool not with wide, confused eyes but familiar ones. Then sting. The gadfly returns. She moves on. Eventually, she reaches the Bosporus, the strait that connects Europe to Asia. Here's your quirky tidbit. The name Bosporus means cow crossing. That's right. This legendary waterway may owe its name to a single desperate swim by a woman-cow hybrid in a myth older than most empires. You follow her across again. More water. More paddling. Her breath hitches with every wave. She sees no land ahead, but her legs keep moving. Because what else is there? The skies darken as she crawls ashore on the other side. She collapses in Byzantium, a sleepy port town that will one day become Constantinople, and even later, Istanbul. Right now, just a quiet place with a few clay-roofed homes, and one extremely startled fisherman who swears that cow just sighed in Greek. But still no Zeus. No rescue, no thunderbolt, no god descending on a cloud to fix the mess. You pause beside her as she breathes slow deep. The air is thick. The fly hovers nearby but stays away for now. The earth, despite everything, is soft here. And for the briefest of moments, Io sleeps. Just long enough for you to realize how far she's come, and how much farther she still has to go. You wake with her. Well, she never truly slept, but something in her posture softened. A moment of peace under a sky that doesn't immediately punish. But the moment is brief. The fly returns. A high-pitched buzz. A sharp sting behind the ear. Io jerks hooves, scraping stone eyes wide. You sigh on her behalf. There's no room for stillness in this myth. She rises and continues southeast toward a land she's never known, but has somehow always been drawn to. Syria, Phoenicia, and then further into the ancient sands of Egypt. Now, if this were a tourist's journey, you'd be taking in wonders. Towering obelisks, black coal eyeliner, golden sunlight bouncing off temple stones. But you're not on holiday. You're a mythical cow dragging tired limbs across a landscape that is too bright, too loud, and far too sandy for hooves. Io walks past Thebes where sphinxes sleep in courtyards. Past fields of papyrus. Past scribes who pause mid-scroll to stare. Word spreads a cow who moves with purpose, who avoids other animals whose eyes reflect too much thought. Priests murmur. Children point. One old woman lays an offering of figs, whispering, "Poor beast." Io doesn't pause. She's drawn forward by a pull she can't explain. The gadfly nips at her, but weaker now. Hera's rage, it seems, doesn't stretch so far. You arrive at the Nile. The water is slower here, lazy, wide. It glistens in the heat like liquid bronze. Birds wheel overhead. Crocodiles sun themselves with smug, ancient smiles. Io stumbles into the shallows. The cool water soothes her bites. She lowers herself belly deep and drinks. And drinks. And then a shift. No thunderbolt. No flash of light, just a shimmer around her. The air shivers. A hush falls, and Io changes. It's not like before. It's slow, gentle. Her hooves stretch into fingers. Her tail shortens. Her muzzle narrows. You watch in awe as her form becomes human again. Not quite as she was older, now lined with fatigue and memory, but human nonetheless. She looks down at her hands, touches her face, then sinks to her knees in the shallows and cries. But this time no mooing. Real human tears. Salt and joy and exhaustion all at once. This is the moment so many storytellers argue over. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks admired Egyptian culture deeply, and many myths exported their endings to Egypt as if to legitimize the story with a foreign stamp. Io's transformation at the Nile may symbolize renewal, fertility, or even the merging of civilizations. But others suggest something more subtle. Some scholars believe Io's restoration was part of an early myth cycle that honored survivors. Not victors, not warriors, survivors. Those who suffered quietly wandered far and kept going anyway. And Io, she keeps going. Not long after regaining her human form, she's said to meet Zeus again. Yes, he shows up, finally. You find yourself in a grove near Memphis, Egypt, an ancient capital, not the one with Elvis. The Nile laps gently nearby, and lotus flowers bloom in slow motion. Zeus appears not with thunder, but as a breeze. He doesn't speak for a while, just watches her. She doesn't look at him. He kneels beside her. Offers. What? An apology. A regret. A second chance. He mutters promises about a future son. About redemption. About making it right. You can't help but wonder if he truly believes that. Or if this is just his way of closing chapters he doesn't want to reread. Io listens. Then she speaks. Some versions say she agrees. Others say she only nods. But what matters is this: she doesn't curse him. She doesn't scream. She simply rises barefoot in the reeds and walks away to begin her new life. Not as a cow, not as a victim, but as a queen. Because, yes, Io is said to become a queen of Egypt. She marries a king named Telegonus, depending on the version, and gives birth to Epiphus, a son Zeus claims proudly. And from this son, myths say, will descend lineages that stretch across dynasties, across continents. Io, the cow, becomes Io, the matriarch. A footnote turns into a founding myth. Here's your quirky tidbit. Ancient Greek storytellers would often retrofit heroes into royal lineages, like someone adding a celebrity name to their family tree. Oh yeah, you know, Egypt. Pretty sure one of our cows founded that place. And so Io's name becomes immortal, not just in Greece, but in Egypt, in astronomy and myth. But what about the cow? You drift forward in time where poets retell her tale in dusty amphora paintings. Roman scribes tidy up the story. Renaissance painters add awkward nudity and swooning expressions. And one cloudy evening, a shepherd in Thessaly looks up at the sky and says, "That cloud looks like a cow." And thus a new version begins. Zeus, desperate to shield his mistakes, turned her into mist, into sky, into forgettable vapor. But Io, as ever, refuses to disappear. Her name lingers. In rivers, in seas, on moons orbiting Jupiter, even in clouds. And you're still beside her. Only now she's no longer running. She stands at the edge of the Nile barefoot, and calm, the gadfly long gone, the past unraveling behind her like a thread of silk in the desert breeze. She closes her eyes, and for the first time in the story, she rests. You linger beside Io in the pale light of dawn, where the Nile's current drifts like slow music, and the reeds whisper half-remembered lullabies. But while the cow curse is lifted, and the bite of the gadfly fades into memory, her journey, like the myth itself, doesn't end there. Now she's something else entirely, a woman reborn, reshaped by the weight of her suffering. And yet even here in Egypt, where temples rise from sun-baked soil, and ibises wade through the shallows like little priests, Io's story begins to shift. Word spreads. People murmur. A woman who once mooed. The one who walked across the world. Her tears made rivers. Myth turns to memory, and memory starts dressing itself in ceremony. You follow her into a city, Memphis grand and humming with sandstone energy. Priests chant, cats watch from rooftops, and the breeze carries incense laced with frankincense and fish stew. It's a city that already has gods, mind you, but Io's arrival stirs something. Not awe, not worship. Curiosity. The Egyptian priests raise their brows at this foreign woman, who speaks of gods that throw lightning and of being watched by a man with 100 eyes. They nod politely. "We've seen stranger," one says, and gestures toward a crocodile-shaped amulet. Zeus, meanwhile, drifts in and out of the story like a god who's not quite sure if he's still needed. He hovers overhead now and then, casting soft clouds for shade, a half-hearted gesture that feels too late. But Io doesn't look up. Instead, she begins to build a life. Not out of thunder, not out of revenge, but out of stillness. She takes up space in the world again, not as a cursed creature, but as a queen. Mainstream historical fact. The Greeks often linked their myths to foreign lands as a way of legitimizing cultural connections. Io's presence in Egypt, especially as the mother of Epiphus, allowed later writers to trace divine lineages to important cities like Memphis, giving Greek mythology roots beyond its native soil. And speaking of Epiphus, yes, her son arrives. The myths are vague on the how of it. Did Zeus return? Was he reborn as a husband-shaped breeze? Or did the gods simply grant Io a child? As compensation, the way you might offer a bakery voucher after ruining someone's weekend. You're there when she holds him for the first time. Epiphus small and squinting in the golden light, swaddled in cloth stitched with lotus patterns. He doesn't cry much. He just stares at her, and in that gaze is something neither cow nor god, just peace. Io smiles. A real one. No hoof twitches, no lightning nearby. Just silence and the steady hush of the Nile. Of course, myths never let things rest too long. Hera finds out. And if you were expecting a dramatic thunderclap or a sudden invasion of divine locusts, Hera is far more surgical. She vanishes the baby. Just poof, gone. Like a breeze whisking away a feather. No warning, no explanation. One moment Io's cooing to her child, and the next she's screaming into empty blankets. Here's the debate. Did Hera actually do this? Or was this a later addition by dramatists who couldn't resist adding one last twist? Some scholars suggest the child's disappearance was metaphorical, a symbol of the fragile link between mortal and divine legacy. Others argue it was Hera's final move in a grudge match that outlasted most empires. You follow Io as she spirals, back to prayers, to pacing, to wild-eyed pleas beneath foreign stars. And yet this time, it's different. Because now Io has allies. Egyptian priestesses take her in. They speak in low voices, light tall candles, and whisper chants meant to soothe and restore. One of them presses a small stone into her palm, carved with a spiral. "It means return," she says. "What is taken will one day come back." And so it does. Epiphus is returned. Again, myths disagree. Was he raised secretly by nymphs, hidden in a distant valley? Suckled by sacred cows in a celestial barn? It hardly matters. What matters is this: he comes back. Safe. Smiling. Smelling faintly of clouds. And Io, she doesn't thank Zeus. She doesn't curse Hera. She just holds her child and begins again. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient sources claim Epiphus went on to found Memphis, or father royal lines that led directly to heroes like Danaus and Lynceus, making Io the grandmother of half the Greek mythological landscape. In this way, she becomes a literal mother of nations. And yet the world forgets her cow shape. Statues rise in Egypt, bearing her face, no horns in sight. Dances are performed at harvest festivals to honor the woman who crossed continents, who walked through the sting of divinity and kept walking. You watch those dances centuries later, recreated by candlelight with dancers tracing hoof-like steps and whispering Io's name beneath masks shaped like moons. And here, under an open sky and the rustle of reeds, the myth does something rare. It breathes. It doesn't burn with vengeance. It doesn't roar with punishment. It exhales. And as Io stands by the Nile, her child playing by the banks, you realize this part of the story is less about gods and more about reclamation. The body, the voice, the name. You sit beside her as the last light fades from the day watching, as her fingers brush the surface of the water, her reflection rippling into softness. And far above, a cloud drifts by. It's shaped like a cow. Of course it is. But Io doesn't look up anymore. She doesn't need to. You're drifting again slower now, like silt through the Nile's current. Time is bending. Io's journey seems to be over. But myth, like sleep, has a way of looping back, of layering symbol over symbol, until even rest becomes narrative. You walk beside her once more. She's not fleeing anymore. Her steps are calm, purposeful. She holds the hand of her child Epiphas, who babbles happily in a mix of Greek and something older, a language of reeds and river breath. But you're not in Egypt anymore. Not fully, because Io is becoming a story. She's being told and retold, each version trimming a bit, exaggerating another, depending on who's speaking where they live, and what they need the myth to do. This section, you're watching the myth evolve not in Olympus or on the Nile, but in the minds of people. The story moves just as she did. In Argos, her birthplace sculptors begin carving her image into marble walls. Not as a cow, but as a serene woman flanked by animals and clouds. They call her the ancestress, the gentle one, the first to suffer well. In Dodona oak, leaves still whisper. Priests begin weaving her name into prophecies, claiming that her tears turned into oracles. Tourists arrive asking which exact branch cried the loudest. You trail a group of Athenian playwrights bickering in sandals. One of them insists she's a metaphor for women silenced by men. Another shakes his head and says, "Nah, she's the Nile. She is the river." A third one says, "What if she's the moon?" And that right there is your mainstream historical fact. Io's myth became tangled up in lunar symbolism. Some versions claim her long wandering journey mirrors the waxing and waning of the moon. A silver cow chased through the night sky by jealous clouds, her white form glowing, fleeing, then reappearing. Others connect her to Isis, the Egyptian goddess, mother, queen, mourner. The parallels are suspiciously aligned: divine mortal relations, a lost child transformation, and power reclaimed. Here's your quirky tidbit. At one point, Roman astrologers decided to name one of Jupiter's moons after Io. Yes, the literal moon. Today, it's the most volcanically active body in our solar system, which is ironic considering Io mostly just wanted to cool down and be left alone. You float through the centuries. In Alexandria, scholars ink her name into papyri, always in the footnotes. Io, who suffered, one scribe writes. Io, whose name became geography. Another copyist smudges her name beside a sketch of a fly and a half-finished cow. She lingers on maps, in poetry, in lullabies. You drift through a sleepy Greek village during the Roman period. An old woman rocks a child beside a fire, muttering a bedtime tale about a girl who walked until the stars noticed her. Her voice wavers. The child yawns. The myth lives. But let's go back, because you're not done with Zeus. He's been quiet, hasn't he? Distant. But you find him again on Olympus, fidgeting. King of the gods, with temples in every direction, and lightning on demand, and yet nervous, because Hera hasn't spoken to him in days, or centuries. You sit beside him as he stares into a small reflective pool. Not a divine scrying mirror, just a puddle formed from condensation near a pomegranate tree. He sees her, Io, still, walking through dreams, through smoke, through the subconscious of an entire civilization. He doesn't smile, doesn't speak, just watches. And maybe, just maybe, he understands he was never the main character. Not in this one. Because this myth isn't about a god who couldn't control himself. It's not even about a jealous goddess with a penchant for pestering cows. It's about someone who endured, quietly, strangely, fully, and in doing so became unforgettable. Historians still argue what's the purpose of this tale. Is it a moral warning? A religious metaphor? A repackaged weather myth with a cow costume? But you're not interested in analysis tonight. You're just walking with her again. Io, the priestess, the cow, the queen, the constellation. She stands at a crossroads carved into ancient stone. One path leads to myth, one to memory, one to moonlight. And without a word, she steps forward, leaving hoofprints in stardust. Because in the end, that's what myth does. It walks. And Io, she never stopped. You find yourself at a shoreline now, not the Nile, not the Ionian, but a mythic coast, where sea foam fizzes around ancient rocks, and the air smells faintly of bronze and myrrh. The wind carries a whisper Io walked here too. It's not literal, of course. By now, her journey is no longer bound to land or hoof. It's legend drifting across time, and you, loyal companion of this slow, unraveling tale, are seeing where her footprints became fables. This section is about what she left behind, not just in people or poetry, but in places. Because if there's one thing the ancients loved, it was attributing physical geography to divine drama. You're looking at the ancient maps now, scrolls unfolded by oil lamp glow. Every mountain range, river bend, or coastal bulge seems to come with a backstory, and Io's hoofprints are all over them. Let's start with the Bosporus again. Remember that cow crossing from section 4. The Greeks called it the Ox Ford, not because of any British universities, but because they believed that was where Io in cow form splashed her way from Europe to Asia. The Ionian Sea. Same thing. They said it was named after her, an eternal blue reminder of a woman who once paddled through salt water chased by a divine mosquito. You hover over Mount Silpium near Antioch. Some ancient travelers claimed they heard mooing from its peak on windless days. Others said the rocks there held fossil-like cow tracks, and no one really wanted to be the first to say, guys, maybe this wasn't literal, so the stories stuck. Mainstream historical fact. This kind of myth-to-map logic wasn't just poetic, it was political. Linking a city or body of water to a divine figure made it seem more important, more blessed. If a goddess's hoof had grazed your town square, your civic pride skyrocketed. Io in this way became a cartographer's dream. Quirky tidbit. In some versions, Io's journey even snakes through Caucasus regions where another famous mythic sufferer, Prometheus, is chained to a rock. Some storytellers had her pass by him, cow eyes full of sympathy. Maybe they even had a brief conversation, depending on the drama level of your preferred source. You imagine it, a woman cow pausing before a bound fire thief, both of them punished for knowing too much. Neither gets a clean ending. Both become metaphors for the human condition, lonely, brilliant, and a little absurd. But let's go somewhere quieter. You're now in Egypt again, only this time the borders are looser, dreamier. The Nile doesn't just flow, it glides like paint down the canvas of a creation myth. And temples here whisper her name. Yes, Io cults. You're stepping into one. It's not a grand institution like those of Isis or Ra. No booming hymns or enormous pyramids. It's smaller, tucked into an alley behind a spice market. Women gather there in the early morning, barefoot on cool stone, carrying offerings of dates and milk. They don't chant, they hum. You listen. The melody is slow looping. No lyrics. Just the rise and fall of shared breath. They don't ask for blessings. They thank her. Because Io to them is not a victim, not a warning. She is a companion, a goddess of persistence, of weathered hearts, of walking forward when there's nowhere left to walk. The priestess, an older woman with gray hair tucked under linen, smiles at you. She motions toward the altar, a small carved relief of a woman beside a cow. Not beneath it, not turned into it. Beside, as if they've always been two halves of one soul. You kneel, even though you're not sure why. And then you notice the feast. It's small, strange, and oddly specific. Festival snacks include honey-dipped barley biscuits shaped like hooves, pomegranate seeds arranged in the shape of an eye, a cheeky wink to Argus, a thick milk stew served chilled and called Io's breath, questionable marketing, but sweet and surprisingly refreshing. Quirky detail, some ancient sources say one of Io's temples gave out free water to travelers under the belief that anyone who'd been stung by fate should never thirst again. The women laugh quietly, telling stories of their own sufferings, but always ending with a line like, "But we kept walking like Io." You sit there beneath a swaying palm as incense curls toward the sky, and somewhere far off, but definitely real, you hear the low sound of a cowbell. Not clanging, not dramatic, just a soft chime, as if the myth were passing by again. Not lost, not fading, just continuing. The world darkens to dusk again. Shadows stretch across temple walls as you drift behind Io's footsteps. Or rather, the echoes of her footsteps, because we've entered the stage of her story where she's no longer walking but being followed. Not literally, not by gods, not even by people, but by myth, which is slipperier than memory, and twice as persistent. Tonight, we follow the trail of Io's descendants, those born of her line, real or imagined, who keep her name stitched into history like golden thread on ceremonial cloth. First up, Epiphas, her son. Remember him? The baby she cradled beside the Nile, lost and found thanks to divine drama and a not-so-apologetic Zeus. Well, Epiphus grows up. Handsome, mild-mannered, a little glow around him if you believe the poets, and most importantly, divine-blooded. The Greeks claimed he went on to rule Egypt, or at least a version of it more palatable to Athenian scribes. In some versions he marries Memphis. Yes, a woman named after the city, or possibly the other way around. Myths aren't picky. Together they found a line of kings. Not pharaohs in the golden mask sense, more like early semi-divine rulers, who had an entire mythological inheritance stitched into their family banners. From there, the story splits like a river delta. One branch leads to Danaus, a descendant who sails from Egypt to Argos, claiming his heritage and founding his own dynasty. That's right, Io's descendants return to her birthplace like salmon, guided by fate, or really determined family genealogists. Danaus has 50 daughters, not a typo, and they go on to play a starring role in another myth, the Danaids, where most of them end up murdering their husbands on their wedding nights. But that's a different bedtime story. The point is, Io's bloodline spreads, from Egypt to Greece, from Nile to Peloponnese, from cow to crown. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient genealogies weren't just Ancestry.com. For nobles, they were propaganda. Connecting a city's founders to a god, or semi-divine figure like Io, meant prestige, divine favor, and a useful excuse for colonization. Quirky tidbit. In some Roman sources, it's claimed that Aeneas, you know, the guy who founds Rome after Troy, was somehow tied into this web, making Io a very distant great-great-grandmother of gladiators and emperors. The math is fuzzy, but the poetry is satisfying. Now here's where things get weird in a fun way. Because once Io's family line hits, the Greek mainland myth layering begins. You're now drifting through dusty scrolls and amphore art, where everyone claims to be descended from someone impressive. Farmers mutter my grandfather's donkey walked Io's path. Sailors swear their boats crossed the same sea she once paddled through. One innkeeper insists her fig trees grow sweeter because Io wept there once. The myth has become not just inheritance, but weather. You see it in metaphors. To be as restless as Io, to walk with the gadfly, to drink the Nile with mortal lips. She's become a poetic shorthand for quiet resilience. Not fire and blood heroism like Heracles, not trickster cleverness like Odysseus, but something softer. Steadier. A cow, yes, but also a current. You float now over the temple of Hera in Argos, where priests still chant prayers to the queen of the gods, but where, interestingly, Io's name appears carved discreetly on side panels. Not celebrated, not center stage, but present. It's as if the myth refuses to vanish even where it's unwelcome. And now we reach the scholarly squabble portion of the evening. Some historians argue that Io's story is stitched together from multiple older myths. Fertility goddesses, moon symbols, early pastoral spirits, all woven into one neat narrative once the Olympians needed a backstory with both pathos and livestock. Others suggest that her tale evolved to mirror the experience of women under divine scrutiny. Not just mortals loved and left by gods, but ones turned into symbols, and then slowly erased by the very legends that enshrined them. But whatever the original tale, one thing's clear. Io never disappears. You see her on pottery drawn beside bulls and winged eyes. You hear her name in ancient lullabies, sung to children, whose mothers perhaps felt a little trampled by fate too. And every now and then you spot her in unexpected places. A bas-relief in a Roman villa, a metaphor tucked inside a love poem, a cow constellation mistaken for something new. Because myths don't always die. Sometimes they graze quietly, waiting to be noticed again. And you're still walking beside her legacy. The flies are gone. The stings have faded, but her story, hoof-printed across cultures, painted onto maps, whispered into temples, keeps moving, softly but definitely forward. By now you've wandered so long with Io that her story starts to feel like your own. The rhythm of her hooves becomes the rhythm of your breath. And tonight we're drifting up, way up past the earth, past Olympus, into the story's highest layer, because this is where myth meets sky. You're lying in a meadow now. It's night. Cool breeze, stars overhead, no divine gadflies in sight. The only buzzing is the occasional cricket, which even by Hera's standards feels pretty harmless. You look up and there she is, Io among the stars. A cluster of lights faintly shaped like a horned animal, just to the right of Jupiter. One of her many afterlives. Because yes, Io becomes a celestial being too, or at least people imagine she does. The myth doesn't end at her death. It rises. Let's talk astronomy. Mainstream historical fact. In 1610, Galileo Galilei points his telescope skyward and sees something strange circling Jupiter. Not a star, not a moon in the traditional sense, but something different. He calls it Io. Today, Io is one of Jupiter's 4 largest moons known for its volcanic activity. Its surface is blistered and cracked, constantly reshaping. Lava flows beneath ice. It's the most geologically active place in the solar system. Quirky tidbit. Scientists suspect the moon Io is so unstable because of tidal friction gravitational pull from Jupiter stretching and squeezing it like dough. Which feels strangely familiar, doesn't it? Io, once stretched by fate, squeezed by gods, pulled across oceans and deserts, still being shaped by something massive and uncontrollable. Even as a moon, she can't rest. You smile a little, thinking Zeus finally gave her a place. Not a temple, not a kingdom, just a rock in the sky. Maybe that's fitting. Maybe it's even an apology. The Greeks didn't have Galileo, but they did have imagination. They stared at stars and connected them to stories like celestial threads. Some versions say Zeus, out of guilt or affection or sheer poetic laziness, placed Io in the heavens. Turned her into a cloud-shaped cow or a silver drift just beyond the horizon. Others say she became a constellation known only to the gods. And you see her every time the night sky feels too quiet to be empty. But before she ascended, Io's myth still had work to do. You find yourself now in a small rural festival sometime in the early Hellenistic period. It's nothing grand. A few garlands of bronze bell children wearing cow masks and mooing with theatrical overcommitment. This is the Io festival, held in a village that claims to be one of her many resting spots. You're sitting near a low stone platform as an old man with a lute sings a ballad about a woman who walked to the edge of the world, got stung, got lost, and got up again. There's a moment where the entire crowd mimics a cow's lowing, not as a joke, but as a kind of sacred sympathy. The sound echoes into the hills, and the night feels briefly mythic again. The festival snacks are here too, those barley hoof cakes and honeyed milk drinks. You try one. It's better than it sounds. And then a play begins. Local actors, some enthusiastic, some clearly just hungry, reenact Io's transformation with bedsheets, flour dust, and an improvised cloud made from sheep's wool. It's not accurate, it's not polished, but it's real. Because the myth lives not in scrolls or starlight, but in retellings like this, in the little imperfections, in the human need to say, this happened to someone, even if that someone had 4 legs for most of the story. You lean back on your elbows and watch the scene where Hermes lulls Argus to sleep. The actor playing Argus wears a cloak covered in googly eyes, anachronistic, yes, but oddly effective. And then Io moos, and the audience sighs, and a child whispers, she's not a cow anymore even before the actor transforms, because even little ones know the story moves. The pain ends, the shape shifts. You drift again. To a modern museum now where a cracked vase shows Io being turned into a cow. No captions, just a faint silhouette. Tourists pass by quickly. Zeus and Hera make for juicier myths. But you pause, because you know what came after. You know where she walked, and just before you leave, you turn one last time and whisper, she made it. She made it across continents, across centuries, across interpretations and translations, and quiet forgettings. Io survived gods, monsters, cartographers, playwrights, and scholars. She survived Zeus. She survived the myth itself. And tonight, with you beside her, she survives once more. Above you, a cloud drifts, just slightly cow-shaped. Below you, stories root deeper into earth. And inside you, something ancient and tired nods and says, she kept walking. So I can too. Tonight, the story folds in on itself like parchment edges curling over a candle's warmth. You're still here, still with Io, but the ground beneath you has softened. Reality feels optional. You're slipping into that liminal space between myth and meaning, between the last sentence and the next breath. We've crossed oceans and deserts, looked skyward and inward. Now let's walk one last road, the emotional aftermath. Because myths usually end where the excitement ends. Slay the beast, escape the curse, win the crown, cue applause. But what happens after? What does it feel like to wake up not as a cow, but as a woman who remembers being one? That's where you are now with Io, the survivor, long after her name has been etched into stars and temples. But before the dust settles in her mind, she lives quietly. A modest house tucked behind lotus groves on the Nile's edge. The boy, Epiphas, plays outside his laughter bouncing off reeds. The servants call her my lady, but softly, respectfully. Not with fear, with affection. She smiles more often now. She even laughs, though it's a quiet kind, like wind brushing papyrus scrolls. But at night, when the fire dies low and her reflection dances in the water bowl beside her bed, Io stares at her own face and thinks, that happened. All of it. She remembers the sting, the eyes, the mooing. She doesn't flinch anymore, but she does wonder, what was that journey for? Mainstream historical fact. Scholars often interpret Greek myths not as literal tales, but as symbolic journeys of transformation, what Carl Jung later called the hero's path. Io's arc isn't victory, it's endurance, a mythic metaphor for surviving a world that constantly remakes you without your consent. She wasn't chosen to rule. She didn't slay a monster. She didn't seduce her way to comfort. She just kept going. And in that going became something unshakable. Let's pause now and visit her mind. You're in her memories, yes, like a dream, but you're gentle. You walk carefully between recollections as if they were sleeping children. You see the meadow where Argus watched her. You see the Bosporus cold and churning. You see Hermes smiling over a lullaby that felt like death. You even glimpse Hera distant and unreadable, a mirror of pain that never fully shatters. And Zeus? Well, he comes and goes in her mind. She does not hate him. That would take too much energy. He is a thundercloud that passed, dampened everything, then moved on. But herself, that's where her memory lingers. The feeling of hooves on cracked earth, the itch of flies and sand, the weight of being watched, the ache of not being believed, and now the warmth of her son's hand gripping hers, the weight of her own voice no longer shaped like a bellow. She is not healed, not fully, but she is whole. You sit with her under a fig tree. She picks one fruit, peels it slowly, offers it to you even though you're not really there. That's just the kind of person she's become. And then softly she tells you something no myth ever recorded. I wasn't alone. And in that moment you realize, neither were you. Because we've been walking with her this whole time. Through every hoofbeat, every glint of Hera's gaze, every sting and storm we've kept her company. Not to save her, not to analyze her, just to witness. To make sure her story didn't fade into mere metaphor. That her name didn't get swallowed up in other people's epics. That someone remembered her not just as the girl who turned into a cow, but as the woman who walked through the center of a world designed to forget her. Quirky tidbit. In some small regions of Greece, shrines were dedicated to Io, not as a goddess, but as a protector of mothers and wanderers. Women prayed to her for safe childbirth. Travelers left pebbles in her name before crossing rivers. They didn't worship her because she ruled anything. They worshipped her because she understood. You rest with her a while longer. The night deepens. A dog barks in the distance. A reed flute plays from somewhere upstream. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of warm stone and blooming night flowers. You close your eyes, and for just a second you feel the shape of her pain. Not sharp anymore, just a gentle curve, like the bend of the Nile, like the shape of a sleeping cow beneath starlight, like the curve of a moon. The river is low this season. You walk with Io along its quiet edge, where cracked clay gives way to tufts of papyrus and frog songs echo through the dusk. She doesn't say much, never did really, but her silence has changed. It's no longer the silence of fear. It's the silence of someone who remembers but no longer needs to explain. Tonight we wander into a quieter part of the myth, one of reflections, both literal and metaphorical. The gods have retreated. The curses have lifted. The temples still murmur her name, but now it's in passing like the second verse of a song most people forget. And Io, she's content with that. You follow her through a small market in Memphis. She greets vendors with a nod, her veil tucked simply, her footsteps soft but firm. Some recognize her, others don't. That's how she likes it. No fanfare, no divine thunder in the background, just living. This is where her myth becomes something even rarer than power. It becomes quiet survival. She's not the only one to carry it either. You start noticing them now, other women at the market, at the river, beneath the shade of acacia trees, who look at her just a second too long. Not with awe, not with fear, with recognition. They too have walked. Some of them lost children. Some bore scars that don't show on skin. Some endured gods of different names, fate, hunger, grief, and made it out, not triumphant, but still here. Io doesn't lead them. She doesn't have to. She is the proof. Mainstream historical fact. In several localized cults, especially in Argos and Bubastis, small figurines were found half woman, half cow. These weren't worshipped as divine idols, but as tokens. Kept in homes. Carried during childbirth. Buried in walls. They were meant to draw the pain out like mythic lightning rods. You walk with her now to the edge of a small shrine. Nothing grand. A curved stone wall, an offering bowl filled with honey and barley, and one faded inscription. She who was not broken. You watch as Io lights a small lamp. The flame flickers, then steadies. Her face glows golden. Not divine. Not painted. Just present. She closes her eyes, and you drift into her thoughts. She remembers Argus and wonders if his eyes ever wanted to be used like that. She remembers Hermes and the song that sounded like an ending. She remembers Zeus and mostly feels nothing. She remembers Hera and wonders if they might have been allies in another version of the myth. Two women caught in the same storm, staring at one another from opposite ends of power. She remembers herself too. That version that mooed, that scratched at the dirt, that ran and ran and ran, and then she breathes. Here's your quirky tidbit in one late Roman adaptation of the myth. Io writes letters. Not literally, we're talking scrolls etched with dreams. She writes to Hera, to other cursed women, to unborn children. The letters never survive, of course, but the idea remains Io had things to say. You imagine one such letter now buried beneath the sand, pressed under centuries of silence. It might have read, "To the one who comes after me. If you are running, know this. The pain is not you. The curse is not you. You are not the shape they forced upon you. You are the walking. You are the remembering. You are still here." Io. You sit with that a while. The wind sighs. The river turns dark and glassy. She speaks suddenly softly. "I thought I would disappear." You don't reply. You just stay. Because the world tried to reduce her to a symbol, a cautionary tale, a celestial footnote. And yet here she is. She stands, smooths her robes, and steps into the water. Not to escape this time, just to feel it. The current curls around her ankles like a promise. The gadfly is long gone. So are the marble eyes, the watchful gods, the chase. All that remains is this. Io. A woman who walked the world and turned her suffering into something strangely sacred. And you who walked with her. Not to fix her, not to cheer, just to witness. You wake not from sleep, but from thought. You're still beside the river, where water slinks around stone, and the reeds speak in rustles and sighs. Io is sitting beside you again, her hands in her lap, her posture relaxed in a way it never could have been in those first chapters. She's no longer haunted, just aware. This section takes you deeper into how Io's legacy shaped the world beneath her, not through myth alone, but through the very ground she crossed. Because in Greek mythology, stories don't just move through people, they leave imprints. And with Io, those imprints are literal. Her journey shaped temples, rituals, even geography. The world shifted around her, trying to remember. You walk now through ancient Argos, her supposed birthplace. Marble stairs cracked by time, olive trees still standing where old priests once watched the stars. There's a shrine here dedicated to Hera, of course, but if you know where to look, there's another humbler one beside it. A narrow relief of Io. Her name scratched in half-faded Doric script. No wings, no lightning, no divine crown. Just a woman beside a cow. Tourists today snap photos and walk away assuming it's part of a farming scene. But you know better. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek cities often reattributed their landmarks to famous myths, especially if they could connect them to Olympus. Argos claimed many things, but Io was one of their oldest. In some versions, she's a local goddess who later got absorbed into the Olympian fold, downgraded from deity to daughter. You walk through the fields where the river Inachus once flowed, named for Io's mythic father. It's mostly dry now, just a line of cracked earth and tufts of dry grass. But legend says that when she was taken, the river stopped flowing in grief, which feels dramatic, until you remember what it's like to lose something you named after yourself. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient travelers swore the waters of Inachus would overflow any time Io's story was retold, which is either poetic exaggeration or the world listening in. You cross into Thebes now, where school children once recited her name alongside alphabets, not as part of grammar lessons, but as moral stories. The teacher would tap the board and say, "Don't end up like Io," but the students would whisper afterward, "She got away, didn't she?" And from there, your steps trace across the ancient trade routes. Remember, Io wandered through regions we now divide into dozens of modern nations. But in the mythic record, she was the thread tying them together. In Byblos, scribes wrote her name alongside unfamiliar gods. In Tarsus, merchants offered coins with her face. In Lydia, her tale was sewn into winter cloaks as protective charms for travel. She became a myth of movement, a myth of endurance through foreignness. And now you're sitting with a group of elderly storytellers in Epirus gathered around a fire that smells like pine and boiled chestnuts. One of them, a woman with hair like silver rope, begins, "Let me tell you about the girl who ran from the sky." And you realize the story's still moving. You glance over and she's there, Io, sitting just on the edge of the circle, hands folded, listening to her own story, as if it belongs to someone else. There's a kind of peace in that. She no longer carries the myth. She lets it walk beside her. She smiles when they get the details wrong. She nods when they get the pain right. And you feel the earth under you hum gently, like a memory that's not yours but still lives in your bones. Because Io's legacy is not just cities and stars, it's the spaces in between. The fields she crossed, the rivers that parted, the bridges that formed in the mouths of those who retell her journey. And above you, a thin cloud moves across the moon, cow-shaped if you squint. But maybe that's just your imagination. Or maybe the world hasn't stopped remembering her. Not yet. Not ever. There's a certain softness now to everything. The soil beneath your steps, the tone of the wind, even the weight of the myth itself. You're walking not just through landscapes anymore, but through memory, through meaning, through the lingering threads that myth leaves in the quiet corners of the world. Tonight we explore how the myth of Io becomes metaphor, not just for gods or punishment or transformation, but for something far more ordinary and far more powerful restlessness. Because Io's story in its truest form is about a woman who couldn't stop moving, not by choice, but by circumstance. And when the gods finally relented, when the sting was gone and her form returned, what remained was the ache, the need to walk, to keep going. You feel it in your own body now, don't you? That sense of motion even when you're still. The Greeks felt it too. They had a word for it, plane, meaning wandering. It's where we get the word planet, those heavenly bodies that refuse to stay still among the stars. Io was called the wandering woman long before planets had names. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient philosophers, especially those of the Stoic and Orphic schools, often used mythic wanderers like Io as examples of the soul's search for meaning. The movement wasn't punishment, it was process. An interior geography charted by pain reflection and transformation. You now find yourself in a small stone amphitheater in Pergamon, where a late Epicurean teacher lectures to a sleepy group of students. He speaks of Io not as a cautionary tale, but as a state of mind. "She is us," he says when we refuse to stop looking for a place to belong. Quirky tidbit. Some ancient sleep charms inscribed with "May Io find rest tonight" were placed under pillows, not to protect against dreams, but to ensure the dreamer didn't wander. That's how deeply her myth permeated cultural sleep. You wander next through a painter's studio in Delphi centuries later. Canvases lean against every wall. One shows a golden cow with a comet tail. Another, a faceless woman kneeling in a river. You watch the painter hesitate, brush raised. "What does she want to be?" they mutter. And it hits you, Io never had a say. Not in her body. Not in her path. Not in the stories others told about her. But now in this studio, in this brushstroke, there's a chance to reclaim something. You peer at the artist's latest canvas. It shows Io mid-step. Not running, not fleeing, not being watched. Just walking. Head up. You leave the studio and pass through a small village celebration. Lanterns strung between fig trees. Children acting out myths with toy masks and painted bedsheets. They argue about who gets to play Zeus, of course. One insists on being Hermes because he gets to nap with his eyes open. But someone quietly asks, "Can I be Io?" She's picked. She steps forward. No mooing this time. No flies. Just a girl in a white tunic walking slowly across the grass as the others part for her. They don't chase. They follow. She leads them in a circle, hands linked, and they walk humming. No dialogue. Just presence. Just story. Just motion. You sit beneath a fig tree and exhale, because this is what survival looks like when it's taught with gentleness. When the myth no longer stings. When the walking becomes something sacred instead of tragic. Io is no longer the cow, or the cloud, or the constellation. She's the journey itself. And the metaphor becomes clear. You are not where you began. You are not what was done to you. You are the path beneath your own feet. And every step, however shaky, however slow, is still movement. Above the stars blink. Jupiter hangs like a coin in the sky. And somewhere just beside it, you know her moon still orbits, still trembles, still glows. But here on Earth you are with her, moving forward, always. Tonight, the air feels different. Slower. Like it too has heard the story enough times to breathe with its rhythm. You and Io are walking beneath olive trees now. The moonlight combing long shadows across the ground. There's no destination this time. No god chasing her. No sting. Just the simple act of walking not away from something, but with something. And that something is understanding. You're entering the part of the story rarely spoken aloud, the one whispered between women at bathhouses, passed from elder to girl, when the night is long and the world too loud. Because beyond the myths, beyond the temples and stars, lies one of Io's oldest truths. She was believed. Not by the gods, not at first. But by those who heard her story and said, yes, that sounds like something the gods would do. You find yourself now in a midwife's hut somewhere in ancient Corinth. A mother-to-be lies in labor, gripping the edge of a woven cot sweat on her brow. The midwife murmurs Io's name like a protection spell. Walked the earth and lived, she whispers. Walked the world and breathed. So will you. Mainstream historical fact, Io became a patron of sorts for those suffering in silence, not officially canonized, not immortalized in Homer's epics. But she endured in folk ritual. In quiet corners of Greece, her name was sewn into amulets muttered during storms scratched into door lintels. Her myth functioned like medicine. Bitter, yes, but healing. You leave the hut and follow a small procession through narrow streets, women carrying clay lamps, their flames flickering in the wind. They wear cow masks not to mock, but to honor. To say, we see you. We remember the shape of your fear. And we are still walking. Quirky tidbit. In Thessaly, one harvest tradition involved young girls carving cow prints into soft clay and leaving them at crossroads offerings to Io. Some were filled with barley, others with bits of honeycomb. One archaeologist found a print stamped with the words, "May the gods see but not touch." You turn that phrase over in your mind. It's not anger, it's boundary. Something Io never had, until now. Because this section isn't just about reverence, it's about reclamation. You're with her as she sits by a lake aged now, gray at the temples. Her son has grown. Her people speak her name with quiet reverence, and she finally speaks herself. She tells her story, not dramatically, not as a warning, but as a record. You sit beside a group of young women who listen, their knees drawn up, heads tilted. One asks, "Did it hurt?" Io nods, "Yes." Another asks, "Did you forget who you were?" Io looks at her reflection in the water and says, "Yes, for a time." And a third, barely a teenager, whispers, "How did you know it was over?" Io smiles faintly. "I didn't. I just kept walking until it no longer followed me." You feel that in your chest, because that's how so many things end, not with closure, but with distance. There's a lesson here that the original myth forgets to mention. Healing doesn't arrive on clouds. It doesn't come with an apology from Zeus. It doesn't look like a sudden return to normal. It arrives in layers, in rituals, in retellings, in the choice to take one more step. Io didn't wait for justice. She made meaning. You follow her one last time through a field of tall grass. She pauses. The stars above pulse faintly. The wind shifts, and then something new. She turns to you and says, "Your turn." It's not a command. It's an invitation to walk, to name the things that once stung, to find your shape again. Because Io's myth ends not in tragedy or triumph, but in permission. Permission to change. Permission to rest. Permission to remember without becoming the memory. And maybe as you lie back in the grass and feel the pulse of the earth beneath you, you realize she's been walking with you all along. In every quiet yes, in every aching step, in every boundary drawn. And when you close your eyes tonight, the dream will not chase you. It will walk beside you, soft as hooves in dew. The path now feels familiar beneath your feet. Not because you've walked it before, but because someone like you has. Many someones. Io's steps wore grooves into myth, and now your souls settle into those same softened lines. This is the part of the journey where stories don't just echo, they resonate. They hum in the body. And tonight, that hum takes the shape of a question. What does it mean to be remembered rightly? You find yourself in a sunlit archive, a place both imagined and possible. Shelves of scrolls stretch up and up. Dust motes drift like lazy stars. And here, Io's name appears not once, but hundreds of times. Not always spelled the same, not always credited fairly, but always there. There's a scroll labeled Daughter of Inachus, another The Cow Who Cried, a third Queen of the River named and forgotten. You open one and read a passage about her journey from Argos to Egypt. It ends abruptly. Another scroll describes her as gentle, shivering, horned, but has no mention of her restoration. Some historians say this fragmentation is natural oral tradition mutates like wind-blown seeds. But you wonder if perhaps the truth is this. Nobody knew what to do with a myth that didn't end in revenge or reward. Io didn't conquer her pain. She didn't get justice in any neat, God-approved way. She just continued. And for many, that made her inconvenient. But here in this archive, her story is being pieced together, not in the hands of priests or kings, but by listeners like you. People who carry the myth forward not as spectacle, but as quiet companionship. You drift into a study circle, young scribes murmuring about narrative structure. One says, "Should we make Zeus more remorseful?" Another shrugs. He didn't say sorry. A third chimes in. Maybe it's not about him. That sentence sticks. Maybe it never was. You flip another scroll. This one doesn't mention Zeus at all. Just Io. A girl, a transformation, a long walk, and a return. It's written like a lullaby. And suddenly, you're in a child's room somewhere centuries later, maybe Alexandria, maybe not. A parent hums the story of Io into the ear of a drowsy little one. The child asks, why didn't she fly away instead of walk? The parent smiles and replies, because she needed to feel the ground again. Quirky tidbit. In a few obscure versions of her myth, Io eventually teaches others how to track stars by walking at night. She creates routes for safe travel using water sounds, tree shapes, and the movement of clouds. In some ways, she becomes the first guide, not because she chose the path, but because she memorized it. And now you're following those maps. Each myth-shaped trail through Asia Minor, Mesopotamia, North Africa. Io's name left like breadcrumbs, like constellations. You don't have to squint to see. But it's not the places that matter. It's the way she looked at them, with eyes that knew they didn't belong there, but stepped forward anyway. You find yourself now in a temple ruin reclaimed by time. Roots splitting marble. Ivy clutching inscriptions. A statue of Io, half-worn, her face gentle. There's no thunder here, no peacocks, no flies, just a whisper etched into the base of the stone. She forgave herself. That's when you realize this part of her journey. The part they never wrote. It wasn't about surviving the gods. It was about surviving herself. The guilt, the shame, the confusion, the numbness that comes after too much divine attention. You sit on the ground and feel it all settle. She forgave herself for loving, for running, for surviving in a form not her own, for not knowing how to stop. for never quite feeling safe in her own skin again. And in that forgiveness, quiet, private, personal, she finds something the gods never gave her. Peace. You look up. Clouds pass overhead, lights spilling through like a blessing that asks for nothing in return. And beneath it, Io walks once more, not out of fear, but because the world still needs stories like hers to keep moving. The morning in this part of the myth is gentle. No fanfare, no divine interruptions, just dew clinging to reeds, and a breeze that smells faintly of warm clay and sweetgrass. Io steps barefoot across the earth, and for the first time, you realize she's not looking over her shoulder anymore. This is where the story turns inward, where we explore what happens when the chase ends and silence returns. Not silence as in emptiness, but the kind you earn, the kind that listens back. Because after everything, after the metamorphosis, the sting, the wandering, the restoration, the child, the myths, the stars, Io finally has space to ask a question that was denied her through the entire story. Who am I now? You walk with her through the garden behind her home in Egypt. It's not grand, just a handful of fig trees, a low stone wall, and a little bench carved with old spiral patterns. She sits and watches her son chase a bird with laughter in his mouth. And slowly, gently, she starts to gather the pieces of herself that were scattered across continents. Here's something that myth doesn't tell you. Transformation leaves behind residue. Even when you return to your original form, the world doesn't unknow what it saw you become. There are still people who flinch when they see her. Still markets that whisper. Still offerings left in corners of temples shaped like cattle with weeping eyes. She accepts them. But she also says softly to no one in particular, "That's not me anymore." Mainstream historical fact. The Greeks believed in the concept of miasma, spiritual pollution, resulting from great trauma or sin, something that lingers and must be cleansed through ritual. But Io's tale suggests a quieter, more radical possibility. What if healing isn't about cleansing what was done to you, but absorbing it, turning it into story, letting it rest? Quirky tidbit. In one rare Etruscan version of the Io myth, she keeps the ability to speak with animals after regaining human form. Not magically, just empathetically. She listens to birds. She understands stray dogs. She treats them like people. And they follow her. You watch now as a small herd of goats curls beside her in the shade. She strokes one gently behind the ears. Doesn't say a word. Doesn't need to. The myth, it seems, has stopped moving. It has sat down, exhaled, unlaced its sandals and let the dust fall away, but even still it leaves marks. Io traces her fingers over a scar on her forearm, not from battle, from scraping against stone while running once somewhere between Anatolia and the Levant. She rubs it like a memory bead, and instead of pain, she smiles. "This stayed," she murmurs, "so I could." That's the thing about survival stories, they don't always crescendo. Sometimes they flatten, soften. And in that softening comes something stronger than defiance continuity. She still wakes some nights with fragments of the old fear. The buzz of a fly, the shadow of a cloud, the sudden pressure of being watched. But now she places her hand on her chest and hums. Not a song, just vibration. Grounding. Real. You follow her into a small writing room, walls lined with scrolls and bits of worn pottery etched with messages. She's been collecting them, rewriting her story in her own words, sometimes contradicting the poets, sometimes laughing at the dramatists. You read over her shoulder, "They say I was chased. I say I walked. They say I was punished. I say I changed. They say I belonged to gods. I say I belong to myself." And that is when you realize this myth didn't need a hero. It needed a witness. You weren't walking beside her all this time to save her. You were there to remember with her, so that the next time someone tells her story and forgets the nuance, the grief, the slow moments of rest, you can step in and say, "Actually, there's more to it than that." Because there is. There's the field she returned to just to lie in the grass, the river she crossed again without fear, the child she raised with no mention of gods, the letter she wrote to no one and buried under fig roots, and the quiet, slow mornings like this one, where she stretches, breathes, and says to the sun, "Still here, The sun sits low in the sky now, not quite dusk, but golden enough to make everything glow, the trees, the river, even the lines on Io's face. She's older, not mythically ageless like the gods. Human older, the kind that earns its softness, the kind that lets you exhale. You're in the final arc of her story now, not the ending, but the settling. The moment when the myth doesn't end in a bang, but simply continues existing as if the world itself is sighing in relief. This is where we look at legacy. Not the divine kind, no lightning bolts or star-shaped thrones, just the quiet ripple a single story makes across generations. You walk with her through the edge of her village. Apophis, now a young man, walks ahead, waving at familiar faces. He is bright-eyed, steady. He knows his story, but more importantly, he knows hers. Because she told him. Truthfully. Not as a bedtime tale not scrubbed clean by poets. She told him everything, her fear, her confusion, the years as a cow, the moments of kindness, the people who helped the gods who didn't. And he listened. That is legacy, not lineage. Listening. Mainstream historical fact. In early Greco-Egyptian society, oral storytelling was often matrilineal, passed through women, during rituals, meals, even childbirth. Myths lived longest in lullabies and quiet warnings, not scrolls. Io's survival in these circles wasn't due to epics, but to whispers. You pass a clay workshop. A girl carves a familiar figure into the side of a bowl. A woman with horns, but also with arms, eyes, and a gently lifted chin. A neighbor asks, "Who's that?" And the girl replies, "She walked. Far. That's all I know." That's enough. Because myths don't need clarity. They need company. Quirky tidbit. In a tiny Cycladic island festival still practiced into late antiquity, women would walk the perimeter of the island in silence, placing flower crowns on stones they called Io's steps. No one ever explained why. No one needed to. You now stand beneath a tree where Io often comes to sit. The bark is scarred with names carvings from others who came to rest, to pray, or simply to pause. One inscription reads, "I left pain here. Please take care of it." Io rests her palm on that carving sometimes, not to claim it, just to say I see you. Because legacy isn't just what you leave behind, it's what you make room for. You watch her help an older neighbor lift water jars. She nods at a child weaving fig leaves into a doll. She tells a traveler how to find a safe road out of town. She smiles at a goat that insists on sleeping near her steps. She does not raise armies. She raises awareness. She teaches through presence, not power. And in this quiet, her myth has bloomed wider than ever before. Not because of gods, not because of drama, but because she stayed. Stayed when it was easier to flee. Stayed when others told her what she was. Stayed long enough to name herself again. You sit with her that evening as she prepares a simple meal. She hums while cutting fruit. She doesn't talk much anymore. She doesn't need to, because now others carry her story. In lands far away, they will call her a goddess. In some cities, they will forget her entirely. But here, in the places she chose to remain, Io becomes ritual. A soft cloth left at doorways for wanderers. A basin of milk poured for the moon. A phrase whispered into steam. She made it. She lights a small oil lamp at sunset, not to call the gods, not to beg for peace, but to mark the night. And as the flame catches you, notice her smile shift into something not even poets could translate. It's not contentment. It's continuity. Because the myth doesn't end here. It glows. It breathes. And tomorrow it walks again. Night has fully arrived now. The stars are out, patient and glittering like notes on a sleeping harp. The breeze is cooler, the kind that makes you pull your robe tighter, not from fear, but from the realization that things are winding down. And so is Io. Not ending, not vanishing, just softening like a story reaching the edge of its own voice. You're walking with her through the outskirts of the village again. The road is dusty, the moon bright, and every so often someone nods respectfully as she passes. Not like a queen, not like a goddess, like someone known. This is the myth's quietest chapter, and it's maybe the most important. Because tonight we ask, what does it mean to outlive your own myth? Io knows. She's heard every version. She's seen her name bent, borrowed, folded into other people's stories. Sometimes she's the victim. Sometimes she's the sacred cow. Sometimes she disappears entirely, replaced by gods who shout louder. But she still walks, still chooses. She's become something rare, a myth, who kept living after the myth stopped caring. You pause with her at a small shrine beneath an olive tree. Someone's left a garland of flowers and a small dish of barley. No name, no inscription, just a quiet gesture. Io doesn't touch it. She simply smiles and murmurs, "Someone remembers." Mainstream historical fact. Over time, myths like Io's, especially those told through oral tradition, often become cultural reflexes rather than active stories. Her name shows up in charms and graffiti and half-remembered proverbs about cows and stars. It's not linear history. It's myth as ambient truth. You watch her trace her fingers along a low stone wall worn smooth by generations of hands. Children once played here. Mothers once sat here to nurse. Pilgrims once leaned against it and told her story with laughter or tears depending on the teller. And now she's here. Again. Still. She sighs not from weariness but from release. You walk to the river one final time. It's changed shape, of course. Rivers always do. But its sound. The sound is the same. She kneels by the edge, cups water in her hands, and drinks slowly. You sit beside her in silence. She turns to you and says, "Tell it how you like." A beat. Then, "But don't forget I was tired." Quirky tidbit. In some late Byzantine folklore, Io became a figure of pilgrimage recovery. Not the saint you pray to for miracles, but the one you ask for endurance when your shoes wear thin, when the road keeps curving, when your shadow seems longer than your body. She was never made patron of power. She became patron of getting through it. And now you understand myths don't have to be triumphant. Some are just true. True in how they mirror us. True in how they let us feel seen. True in how they refuse to disappear even when we try to rewrite them. Because you could redraw this story 100 ways. Focus on Zeus, on Hera, on transformation, on symbolism. But in the end, you always return to her. The girl who ran, the cow who wandered, the mother who endured, the woman who chose to stay. Above you, the stars begin to fade. Not from light, just from the coming of sleep. The moon's reflection trembles slightly on the water's surface. Io closes her eyes and says, "I walked far enough. Now let the story walk." And in that single sentence, the myth finally lets go. Not of meaning, not of memory, but of motion. Because now you are the one still moving. And the story, it rests, just like her. The wind is a whisper now, just the faintest hush brushing across the land, carrying no message, no omen, just peace. The path behind you has grown long, looping across deserts and rivers, through temples and myths, dreams and dust. But ahead of you, there's nothing to chase. Because at last, Io's story has stopped running. You sit beside her one final time, just beyond the last bend of the road. There's no audience, no altar, no gods overhead, demanding devotion or repentance. Just the earth, the sky, the sound of her breath. She is older still now. Hair, gray eyes soft. Her hands are wrinkled and steady. And for the first time in this long, winding tale, she has nothing left to prove. That is her victory. It was never about defeating gods. Never about revenge. Not even redemption. It was about arriving. Not at a temple. Not at a throne. At herself. Tonight, the sky above you stretches wide, starlit, and quiet. No thunder. No divine symbols. Just constellations doing what they've always done, glow shift, wait to be reinterpreted. And perhaps somewhere in those constellations, someone still imagines a cloud-shaped cow drifting across the sky. But you know better now. Io was never just the cow, never just the girl, never just the mother or queen or wanderer. She was the middle, the ache, the process, the path. She was the proof that stories don't need to resolve, they just need to be felt. Mainstream historical fact. By the Hellenistic era, mythographers had reduced Io's tale to a few neat sentences in scrolls. Turned into a cow by Zeus, pursued by Hera, restored in Egypt, ancestor of heroes. That was all. But you've walked every step with her. You saw the flybites, heard the river's lull, felt the weariness in her bones. You watched her forgive, not because she had to, but because carrying the weight forever would have broken her more than the transformation ever could. And now she stands, not tall, not glowing, just whole. She turns to you, presses something into your hand. A small stone worn smooth, unremarkable. Except for one carving. Keep walking. Then she nods, steps down the path into the dusk, her form fading not in tragedy, but in gentleness, like mist curling off a field. She doesn't look back, because she doesn't need to, and neither do you. You remain there for a while, stone in hand, the hush of the world wrapped around you like a blanket. You might fall asleep here. You might walk a little more. It doesn't matter. What matters is this. The myth ends. The meaning remains. And now, you're still. Completely. The story has eased itself closed like parchment curling by the last flicker of a candle. You can feel your body resting a little deeper now. Your breath is slower. Your eyes heavier. The world quieter. Let the final echoes of Eo's journey sink softly beneath your skin. The steps she took across continents now drift across your thoughts, like clouds across moonlight, slow, untethered, and free. There's no need to remember everything. Myths were never meant to be held in full, only in feeling. So let go of the details. Let go of the timelines. Let go of the questions. You've witnessed enough. The long walk is over. The wind is kind, now brushing through your hair like a lullaby. The stars are watching not with judgment, but with calm. You might hear her name again one day. In a book. In a dream. Or simply in the way you get up after something hard and decide to move anyway. That's how she lives now, not on altars, but in motion. You are safe. You are not being chased. You are not being rewritten. You are here, and here you may rest. Let the dark cradle you. Let the night remember for you. Let the story keep walking while you at last simply sleep.